for the greatest show in fantasy football history, hosted by the incomparable Scott Connor and the one and only Ray GQ. I present to you Destination Chill, where football and fantasy collide.
Good evening, good people. March 13th, 2024. We are back for the third time in 4 nights on Destination Chill. Back to talk some more free agency. We are now 5 hours post the official start of the league year. A lot of stuff has happened that we did not get to cover on the Monday night stream. And I think there's a couple things we can talk tonight that will help us shape maybe some ideas for dynasty trades, things to look out for going forward. We'll talk a little bit about acting after we get all the information. We hit on that Sunday night, Ray. If you remember, we talked about making bets before we get all of this news that is about to crush us over the next 3 days. But there's some chances to still get some money on the table or get some offers out there before things are all unraveled in terms of what's going to happen. So welcome in, Ray. Another Destination Chill Wednesday nights. I think this is our third Wednesday night since we started going twice a week. And getting ready to chop it up with you. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm good, baby. I'm good. I got the pen out because I've been listening to the comments. They said timestamp the damn show. So I'm going to make sure that I timestamp as we go. So as soon as it's over, I can put the chapters out there for everybody. But nah, man, I'm excited. We got Derrick Henry, got a new home since the last time that we talked. Joe Mixon, Sam Darnold in Minnesota, Calvin Ridley, of course, Diontae Johnson, somebody that we want to talk about, still waiting on Hollywood Brown. And I posed a question before we came on the stream. Does this sort of change? It seemed like New England really wanted to get an elite wide receiver. And I understand that they need a quarterback. But I just wonder if it's one of those situations where if BPA is Marvin Harrison Jr., are they more apt to select him now, knowing they didn't have a guy? They take a shot on a Penix or a Bo Nix later, or they roll with Jacoby Brissett this year, a la Davis Mills in Houston a couple of years ago. If things go south, you got your receiver of the future there. You'll be picking high in 2025. So I think there's a lot of things that we're going to be able to dive into tonight. So please engage with us in the comments, in the chat. Holler at us, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you check out everything that we're doing at DD. And I see people asking about the hats. We just had to wrap up some revenue things with Destination Devi that we're going to announce soon. But now that all of that junk is out of the way, we're going to make sure we get the hats live. We got like 5 different styles of hats. We'll get those up, and there's some more exciting stuff on the way. I'm looking at some stuff over here, Scott, that I'm saving for a special date, but the people will get that real soon. But let's dive into it, man. Where you want to start at?
Well, let's start on the stuff that broke basically after we went off the air on Monday night, because you already mentioned Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones. We can talk a little bit about kind of the bridge quarterbacks and what that means for these situations, because I think they're all different between Minshew, Darnold, Brissett. I think we can look at what the NFL team said there and kind of decide what we want to do with those players in Superflex. But let's start with the running backs, because I thought of you. I thought of all the conversations we've had over, years, but definitely the last year and a half for sure, with on Monday afternoon, and we even talked about it. I think if you had Aaron Jones or Joe Mixon in Dynasty on Monday afternoon, you were feeling a little uneasy. You know, when Josh Jacobs signs, when it sounded like Mixon was going to get cut, and then they announced, man, they're signing Zach Moss, Mixon's getting cut, and you've already seen like 6 running backs sign, you're like, man, I'm not feeling too good if I have those 2. Then you wake up, and it's like Aaron Jones is signed with the Vikings. Joe Mixon's been traded to the Texans. And honestly, those are 2 damn good landing spots, maybe just as good as the spots that they left. But I think it also speaks to what we talked about on Monday night, where, you know what, their NFL looked at those guys and said, those guys are good. They historically can do a very specific thing and do it on a high level with a decent amount of volume. We are the Texans. We are trying to win the Super Bowl next year. We are not going into the year going, man, hopefully we can draft our starter. So those guys got scooped up even faster than I thought. And the Texans basically are going to pay Mixon his salary, which is comparable to what all these guys are getting. And Aaron Jones got $7 million. So like they went right in, got jobs. They're starters. You feel just as good now as you did 3 days ago when you had them on your dynasty roster when they were on the Packers.
Do you feel any better? Do you feel any better about Joe Mixon in that situation where, I mean, they're bringing back their whole receiving core. Dalton Schultz, offensive coordinator, Tank Dell's back healthy, inserted as the starter off the rip. Nico Collins. You got Joe Mixon probably going to be running behind a better offensive line that he had in Cincinnati. The weapons are just as comparable from an overall team, schematic. No one player is better than Jamar, but I mean, this could be a situation where he wasn't very efficient last year, but I mean, he could be in position to score a lot of points. You want pieces of good offense. It's like, do you feel any better about Mixon ending up in Houston right here? And then conversely, I want you to touch on really quickly the Cincinnati backfield, Zach Moss versus Chase Brown, because a lot of people, rightfully so, enthusiastic about Zach Moss. He was a very good running back in relief of Jonathan Taylor. But I also think that the team is given a little bit of a vote of confidence to what Chase Brown can do, whatever role that is, which I don't believe that is the full-time 90% going to tote the rock running back. But they've got to have some level of confidence that he can be a serviceable rusher and his usage in the receiving game. So I think this might be like a win-win for all three of these running backs.
Yeah, I mean, Mixon had over 300 touches last year. Pretty par for the course for him. 20% target share, par for the course for him. He had 12 touchdowns. I think par for the course for him. I wouldn't look at those numbers and say they're going to go up. You can't sit here and project him for over 300 touches, project him for double-figure touchdowns, project him for 1,400 yards, 50-plus catches. I mean, he strung together a pretty good season. I think the issue is for what he was getting paid. They didn't like the fact that he wasn't giving many explosive plays. I don't think they ever fully trusted him as like the full-time third down back. Like you always wondered, man, why doesn't this guy get 70, 80 catches a year, right? Like he has the skill set. You watch him play, and there'll be 2 or 3 plays a game where he'll catch it out of the backfield, and you go, that looks like Saquon Barkley. Like it looks like, damn, they should just run this guy all the time in the passing game, but they never really did consistently. A lot of his catches were dump offs. I mean, he only had 300 some yards. So it's not like they're running routes. He's more of he's on the field. Burrow's good at checking down to running backs. So whatever running back's there is going to get receptions, but he's not really adding to your passing game. So I think he's the same, Ray, honestly. I think he's the same, but you know what? If you had him, you feel good because he's RB14, RB16, RB10. Like the dynasty value was never there, but you feel awesome about the situation because there was a legit worry with Mixon. Had he been cut, because they didn't have to cut him until Friday. That's when his roster bonus came into play. They could have done him real dirty and cut him Thursday night or traded him Thursday night when every other job was full. And then there's a risk that, he gets Dalvin cooked. He gets Zeke where he's like sitting out there for a while, which is going to disrupt probably the opportunity that he's going to walk into the season with right now. So I think you got to feel good, but I wouldn't project him for more than what he's got.
Right,
I think these guys just are what they are.
Talk about the Cincy.
I'll say this. They saved $3 million by cutting Mixon. I think they view Zach Moss as maybe a little bit of an upgrade from the explosive play standpoint, but I don't think they're going to just ride Zach Moss for the 300-plus touches that Mixon was taking. This is a 60-40 backfield. Moss is the starter. Chase Brown's going to be, guess what? What he was last year, but hopefully for the entire season and not just the last 6 games when he was healthy. But I think what I think they envision? A passable version of like the Zeke Pollard type of platoon. And do they have the same line, the same scheme? Remember who their offensive line coach is? Frank Pollock.
Pollock.
So, I mean, he comes from the Cowboys. So, I mean, I don't think it's Zeke Pollard in their prime. But I think that's probably what they're going for, and they're doing it with a guy making $4 million, and they're doing it with a rookie contract, 4th-round running back in Chase Brown or 5th-round running back in Chase Brown. So, I think you got to be in on Moss. You almost got to pick Moss right around the same place you'd pick Mixon, honestly. I think he's a huge winner because now he's lumped into he's a starter. Like he's lumped into that. You probably got to pick him in the top 24 or so. He's been super good. He's as good as Jonathan Taylor.
I'll just say this. I'm not gonna let you do that. I'm not. I don't.
No. Let me finish, and then
I'm not gonna let you do that, Scott. He's not as good as Jonathan. I don't care what the number. He ain't as good as Jonathan Taylor.
I'm just looking at their efficiency since the beginning of 2022 when Moss came to Indy. Side by side on a per opportunity basis, they were equivalent in the Colts offense. That's all I'm not sitting here saying we got a Jonathan Taylor replacement.
Listen,
that's
man,
all I'm saying. He's not as bad as, here's the thing, right?
I
Fantasy
don't think anybody
managers
thinks
buried
that.
Zach Moss when he got cut by Buffalo or traded by Buffalo. And we see just sometimes these guys take a little bit. Sometimes they bounce back and they're right back and getting a starting.
Let me reel this in just a little bit. Everything you're saying is
Reel it
right,
in.
but I will say
Reel it in.
he has not been a model of health himself.
Correct.
So
Yes.
to even like just a little bit, I think when he's on the field, he is better than an average running back. Absolutely. I really do believe that. It's probably going to be a little bit of both of those guys. And I think there'll be moments within the season where it might be a 2-game Chase Brown stretch because Zach Moss is nursing a hammy, right? And in those 2 games, he probably is going to produce nice return for you. But once Moss is back, I agree with you that he will assume at least that 1A role. But you know what? You never know. They may switch it up and have damn Chase Brown out there early doing certain things and bring Zach Moss in to be that. I think this is a situation to where all 3 backs will be usable, and this is a rare outcome where I think both of the Cincinnati guys are very much in play to be usable on a week-to-week basis, and Joe Mixon is going to do what Joe Mixon has always done. Now, I do want to talk about the big signing that everybody expected to happen, and then we finally got it, but Derrick Henry to the Baltimore Ravens. We were talking earlier today, Scott. I ain't BSing, man. I think 15 TD floor is about where I'm at with Derrick Henry. Like, Zach, I'm looking at what Gus Edwards did last year, and I'm just going to go out on a limb to say that Derrick Henry is probably a little better of a running back and probably more trusted than a Gus Edwards and will receive a little more opportunity than he did. That RPO game with him and Lamar Jackson, you know, I know they lost Moses up front, but this is outside of Hopium Island in Dallas. This is about as good as it gets for Derrick Henry wanting to compete for, you know, a Super Bowl. Now, my one concern is because he is a little older, I wonder how much they plan on running him. If they try to, you know, spell him a little bit more at the end of his career, towards the back 9 of his career. But I think this is a fantastic landing spot for Derrick Henry. If you have him, whether his value truly increased or not, people believe this is a very good situation for him, and he's going to score you a lot of points. So you probably got some increased ADV on Derrick Henry. How you feeling about that Baltimore spot?
100%. 100%. I think everything you said is true. I think he's become less efficient as the years have gone on, but what do you expect? Like, he's getting to be, you know, 27, 28, 29, 30. You don't expect the guys to get better. You know what I mean? Even if their situation slightly improves. But I don't think the Ravens care about that. Gus Edwards has been one of the least efficient running backs that there is. But then all you look at is efficiency in the red zone and his yards per carry when they need 5 yards. You know what I mean? So I think for Henry, he just is the same guy. And he's the same guy until he's not, right? And I'm done betting on when that's going to be, because I think really at this point, the only thing that's going to slow him down is going to look something like just an injury that takes him away from the game for a long period of time. We're not talking, you know, an ankle sprain or something like that, because it seems like every time he gets banged up, it's like the dude comes right back, and you see these videos of him, and you're just like, dude, that guy can go right out there at age 30 and handle more workload than anybody in the league. So, I mean, I'm not going to bet against him.
Dynasty Psych, question. If I'm a bona fide contender, would you trade your late, let's say it's the 112 this year, and you get what I'm saying, you are a legitimate contender, and you know how we feel about trading for running backs, especially in March. I just don't think that's a sound decision. I would not do that. But hypothetically, just indulge the conversation in a vacuum. Would you give up the 112 for Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I think that's the price you'd have to pay minimum, because here's the thing, when you're buying guys like Saquon or Jacobs or even Mixon, Aaron Jones, Derrick Henry, I mean, any of these guys that are on their second, third contracts, where do they usually sit in March? On someone else's roster that's probably in a similar spot as you. Unless it's just, I won the ship last year and I'm willing to sell every old running back I have. The biggest key is, would I pay a first for any of those guys with the right construction? I look at my team and I go, man, my best running back is, I don't know, Tajay Spears. He was my RB1. I'd love to pair him with a hammer running back like Henry, right? But I think the deeper question is, sure, everyone would pay that price if they're in that spot. I wouldn't pay that price if I already have Saquon and Aaron Jones on my roster. I'm not giving up my first for Derrick Henry. I'd rather just do something else with it. Doesn't make it not a fair price. I think the deeper conversation is, right, a lot of these running backs we want to buy. All of us have rosters where we go, man, I could use a hammer running back. Here's the thing. The people that often have these guys already are the people that already want them, generally. So you have to find, and that's where I always pull back and say, you have to find a buyer that is willing to let it go for the fair price. Because, Ray, if you're a contending team and you think you have the best team in the league and your best running back is Derrick Henry and someone comes to you and says, hey, you want the 112? You're going to probably go, you know what? I'm probably not motivated to move for that. What leverage are you going to give me to push me over the cliff there where I'm willing to send you the Henry and say, now I have enough assets that I'll go find his replacement for cheaper or a similar price down the road. So that's the real conversation is it a fair price? Yeah, it's a fair, when I'm really hungry, I don't care if the steak's $100. It looks good and I'll buy it, right?
Right.
So I think it's the same thing with would I pay it? Yeah, but are you prying it away from another manager?
That's a whole different conversation.
That's the real question.
Let's wrap up the running back conversation because there's a lot to get to with the wide receivers here. I want to talk about two running backs that I believe so far through this point in free agency are big winners. And one of the situations, I just don't even reasonably foresee them bringing in a running back early enough to even threaten one of these veterans. I know that everybody's favorite sixth-round sleeper is going to come in and usurp every running back on the roster, but the reality, the Pachecos of the world happening is slim. It's just a slim outcome. I think two major winners right now through this point in free agency are both Kyren Williams and you can say the combination of the Carolina backfield, but Chuba Hubbard in particular, because that's a spot where Miles Sanders is under contract, I believe, through next season. He's not going anywhere this year. They've got Chuba Hubbard locked up, and they don't have enough draft capital, and they have much bigger needs than a damn running back to spend any. They're not spending 33 or 39 on a running back. I don't know when they pick after that. I don't believe they have a third-round pick. Like, just doing the process of elimination, they're not even bringing in guys to take carries from them. It looks like that backfield under a new offensive situation is pretty much locked and loaded in Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. And before you poo-poo it, Miles Sanders is literally free. We are doing auctions right now. He's a sub $10 player out of a $1,000 budget. So he is literally free. I don't know where he's going in startup drafts, but it's free. Chuba Hubbard, Kyren Williams also up to this point, Scott, have not only survived, but they've thrived. The Carolina Panthers upgraded their interior offensive line with 2 guards, and so did the Rams, whose offensive line at the end of last season graded out as a top 10 line according to PFF, and then they upgraded with Jonah Jackson and brought back Elijah Dotson to solidify that middle. I mean, this is looking good for both of these running backs who, at least free agency, it was a worry or a scare that one of the Aaron Joneses or the Josh Jacobs or one of these guys could fall into one of them situations. Shit, man, them shares looking nice on your rosters right now if you got either of them running backs.
Yeah, I mean, Kyren, we've talked about Kyren a lot, led the league in opportunities last year. Even if it goes down 20%, 25%, which, again, that's also a bet. I mean, we've talked about this how many times in Heisman chat. Like, that's not the Rams style to bring in another guy and go, let's give him 50% of the work, 40% of the work.
It's not what they do.
So there's still value to be had. If we're talking odds, you've already kind of survived. If the odds of them bringing in another running back before free agency was, let's just say, minus 500, that's not as high now, right? He's survived one of the biggest times where, man, there's a lot of guys that they could bring in and just say, man, it's a little bit annoying for Kyren. So he's not out of the woods yet, but it's not their style to run two running backs 60-40, 50-50. Like, their backfield is not going to look like Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson. You know, like, it's not going to probably be split up the way some of these others are. And even if they draft somebody, Ray, I mean, does this draft class scare you enough where they draft a guy in round 3 or round 4 and you're immediately, like, scared for Kyren, especially in a lot of these leagues where we've seen it over the last couple of years. It takes running backs a little bit of time to get acclimated. We assume because they're running backs, every one of them, week 1, is going to be ready to handle the load. And then you'll see, this guy takes a little while to get on the field, and it takes till week 10 to get touches consistently. All of a sudden, you're in year 2, and you're going, man, we really shouldn't have faded the incumbent for this reason. So I agree with you. I think James Conner is another huge winner. I think we have James Cook as probably a winner.
James Cook.
They haven't brought in – they could have brought in a hammer that you could say threatened him a little bit. Not saying they're not going to. But, a team signs a Deontay Foreman or A.J. Dillon. Does that scare you off of a guy like Kyron or James Cook?
Absolutely
or is it
not.
just –
No.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
No.
So,
let me just say this too. Like, listen. Is he really? Miles was awful last year. What is the team done? It doesn't matter. Like, it really doesn't matter. If they're there and they survive, what are we chasing in fantasy football? I don't care. Let me tell you right. I don't care how many times Scott says something. I see D-Bro in the chat. Literally, this ain't no shot at anybody. I'm just keeping it real. Don't nobody know what's going to happen. What you're trying to do is take just the best probability bet, right? That's all you're doing. So instead of saying Miles Sanders stinks, understand they've brought nobody else in. They're probably not spending the capital on a running back that matters. So there's a good chance that one of those two players is going to have a prominent opportunity role in that backfield. They've upgraded the offensive line. They brought in a wide receiver. So despite the fact that you might think this player stinks, the ROI on the investment that you have to make to draft the player going in round 20 or whenever it is, it's a plus EV bet, period. Like, it's just a plus EV bet. You just make it. You just say, I'll take a dart throw on one of those guys because they're in a situation that can yield some opportunity. But when you're doing that, it's baked into the price. You're not drafting Miles Sanders to be a goddamn RB1 on your roster or your RB2. You're taking him as the 5th, 6th running back, and you're just saying he could fall into some work. That's it.
Yeah, and the reality is whether the Panthers add a third body or not, none of them are probably going to be worth having unless the offensive line gets better, the quarterback gets better, the situation gets better. So that's more of a bet of what you're making it. You could insert any 2 names in a backfield that was bad and go, I don't really want those 2. But then they turn it around. Why were people excited about Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson before the team brought in DeAndre Swift? Because the Bears were good at running the ball last year, right? Like, it's like, I kind of want a part of that running offense versus the Panthers. Oh, man, both of those guys suck. And the reality, Ray, is Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson really probably much better than Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders? Or are they kind of like very situational, right? Like,
yes.
The good team with the good line and the good offense are going to have production. Bad team, bad line, bad quarterback, their running backs probably aren't going to produce. So I think that's a great mention because people are still, we're in these best ball drafts right now. They're still not taking those Panthers running backs. No. Miles is still not going till round 16, 17. Chuba, round 11, round 12. He's fallen behind Zach Moss, Devin Singletary. He's fallen behind all these guys that were going where he was or later. They're all getting pushed up now, and he's kind of fallen back, and it's like there's really no reason he should go down. If anything, he should be getting drafted higher because they didn't bring anybody in, but it's the opposite.
All right. RB talk over, done with that. I know that was stressful. It was hard. Wide receivers, man. Wide receivers on the move. I think we had a couple of big dogs on the move. Who do you want to start with? Which one? It's interesting. I think the Ridley landing spot is interesting. I think it's a fascinating sort of conversation about just about everybody, from Will Levis to Chigo Okonkwo to, DeAndre Hopkins. And I also think that the Diontae Johnson to Carolina, again, another interesting dichotomy about how to value those kind of wide receivers, how to value those situations. Who do you want to start with? Thoughts on that? And I don't believe we had a chance to discuss really quickly Darnell Mooney to the Falcons. I think that happened after our Sunday stream. So let's touch on it. So Mooney, let's start with Mooney to the Falcons, and then we'll get to the bigger names. So Mooney to the Falcons does what for you?
It doesn't do a ton, but at the same time, he at least goes to, I'll just talk about context. Like, you can probably move Mooney in a dynasty league now for something, whereas before he was a roster clogger, he was a dead asset. You're probably going, man, if he doesn't land in a good spot, I don't really want him. It's funny, though, because everyone's thinking, oh, he's going to land in Kansas City, right? Then I'm going to really be able to sell him high. Then he goes to Atlanta. Then people are, okay, fine, Atlanta. But then you look at his deal, pretty comparable to what Gabe Davis got. But then you look at Atlanta and you look back at Minnesota and how many receivers they were able to support. It never was super fantasy relevant, but even if he's the third target, non-Bijan third target behind Pitts and Drake London, there's still going to be somebody that goes, you know what, I can get behind it if it's what we think, right?
Right.
So I think for what you thought it was going to be, Kansas City versus what it ended up being, I don't feel bad at all taking some shots on Mooney. I'm looking now, he's now going in the 15th, 16th round of these drafts.
He's moved up. He's moved up.
He's moving up.
He's moving up. Yep.
So
right.
I think it's in Dynasty, I'll just say this. If you can sell him, I'd sell him for a third because he's the type of receiver that goes from clogger and then could easily be clogger by midseason. But you can now sell him, so take advantage of it. But let's move on. Let's go Diontae first.
All right,
that's the one we've been really going back and forth on.
Let's talk about him.
I mean, we had this conversation a lot before this about Diontae goes from the Steelers, who were frustrated as hell despite running the Trinity. You see in Diontae, he shows up in pretty much every metric over the last 3-4 years of like, damn, that guy's good, but his situation's probably holding him back. Go back to his 170 target season with Ben Roethlisberger. Like, he finished wide receiver 9, but then ever since then, it's been not trustworthy, shaky. You don't feel good about it. But then he gets a reprieve, right? Which had caused his dynasty value to kind of go to no man's land, where everyone that had him knew his peripherals were good, great separator, elite at commanding targets, but stuck on the shitty Steelers. And then all of a sudden he's getting traded to the Panthers. And it's like, wow, everything that the Panthers needed last year, he brings. And he's by far the number one receiver. So my mind goes to, remember Ray's early Trinity videos talking about how good Adam Thielen was? You're like, this is kind of like a younger version of Adam Thielen. And why can't he get a 30% target share of a league average total? 525 attempts. We're talking 150 targets right there.
Yeah, he should.
From wide receiver 50 in Dynasty to dude could finish top 24. So you couldn't have asked for a better reprieve on your Dynasty shares for Diontae Johnson. And if you had him in best ball, you're feeling like, damn, because he was going in like that dead zone. I'll take him at round 9 or round 10 when he's just sitting there. Now you're like, man, I really want to get some shares, probably 2 or 3 rounds higher. So great. Awesome spot. Can't say enough about it.
I think what's fascinating about this, and I agree with you, I think this is exactly what Carolina needed. I mean, literally, Adam Thielen, you can go back on YouTube, and I was calling the shit before it happened, weeks before. I was like, hey, go get Thielen. He's doing a lot in that offense. It's probably going to yield some points for a little bit. And it did. It sustained until at some point Adam Thielen is going to run out. And they didn't have anybody that can win quickly. They couldn't separate. Mingo didn't know what the hell he was doing. Hayden Hurst was done. They literally had no body. Icky was not playing well on the offensive line. It was bad. You know, you fire your first-year head coach mid-season. Things were awful from top down. But I still find it fascinating that so much confidence is being placed in this situation. And I'm a Bryce Young. I like Bryce Young. I think this move to Dave Canales could be a very good thing for him. Canales has had success with limited stature type quarterbacks, but it's just funny how much confidence that we have in Bryce to be able to get the ball to Diontae Johnson. Now, let's just say he can do that. I think this is a spot where he should walk into $140 easy. Targets, at least $140. And this does not, they'll still draft a receiver or 2 in the draft. I still fully expect them to take one at 33 and 39 or 39, but they're not coming in and eating Diontae Johnson's lunch. That's just a silly proposition to make. This is a proven command target share getter. Like, he is proven to be able to do that, and they knew what they were doing when they were trading for this type of wide receiver that can win quickly, that can get open, that can threaten defenses short and intermediate. We'll see how they'll fill out the rest of the team. I think it makes it interesting the type of receiver they may target in the second round, but this is a spot where Diontae Johnson should get fed. He should be able to do what he wants, which is get the ball thrown to him. I'm bullish on Diontae. I like this for him. The question is, the person who has Diontae now probably values him at a price that I really don't want to pay, even though the production is probably worth it. But the reality is I still don't want to pay that price for him. So it puts you kind of in a weird spot. What do you pay if you want to buy Diontae? And then conversely, what the hell do you sell for? Because I don't think you're getting a lot of first for him, but you damn sure don't want to sell for like the 203, the 204. You'd want something more than that. You feel like you would want more than that for Diontae Johnson. So he's an interesting receiver, but this could be a nice two-year window for him where he just gets fed.
Yeah, I mean, he's moved up 3 spots on Keep Trade Cut already, and I think that's just reflective of the news. I think that the way you analyze this for me is if you look at Diontae, he's going to be 28 when the season starts. He's no different than the 1-year buy of a Mike Evans, a Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. I mean, those guys have been slightly better than him in their careers. But I don't look at him as I'm trading for a 28-year-old receiver and I'm going to get multiple years. This is the year. This is the year where everything sets up for him to absolutely smash in terms of target commanding. But I fully expect, and I guess the other thing would be maybe the Panthers aren't competent and this lingers for multiple years, but I wouldn't bet that. There's going to be another receiver or two that crosses paths with them, whether it's free agency or the draft, that will impact Diontae. So I'm looking at him as it's a 1-year bet. If you can really sell yourself on, hey, I want Diontae, he's a guy I can get in my league, I'm not opposed to paying the 112 for him. I don't want to do it. I'd rather go the other way, but you have to really look at your construction and say, is that the best use of my pick? But that's probably the price. And I think the real interesting thing here is the sell point, because you could have looked at Diontae. We may get another one here at any moment with Hollywood Brown, where these guys are proven good receivers. Never great, but always good. And at one point, both of those guys were top 24 receivers, value-wise. But then what happened, Ray? They were just average. They didn't smash in a given year. They had a down year or two, had some injuries. They just slide down the dynasty ranks slowly, year after year, in favor of new guys. You know, guys like Christian Watson, guys like Jaden Reed, George Pickens. Like, they're just going to replace them. Even if those guys never have had a year as good as Diontae or Hollywood Brown, they're just going to replace them because they're younger. So it's like, once you get to this point, Chris Godwin got there last year. Deontay's there now. Hollywood Brown's there now. Once they're there, they don't come back if they had never been elite for. Devontae Adams can come back because the dude was a top 5 receiver for years. But you don't go from Diontae Johnson, Hollywood Brown, Chris Godwin to just way back up. So what this is a window. You got a reprieve. If you had a bunch of Diontae, you have a bunch of Hollywood Brown, and he lands in Kansas City or something like that, this is your window. For me, I examine each roster. Right? Do I really need that Diontae Johnson as my wide receiver 6 on that team?
Right.
Do I really need that? And if I say, you know what, I can probably get by without him, this is found money, I'll go to somebody and be like, hey, you give me a 25 first, I'll bank that first for later. But that is not an indictment I don't like Diontae. That's just an indictment of, I think this is probably your last chance to move them. The last chance where there's any real market demand on them. So you have to do that analysis if you're holding Diontae now, and I'd rather not go pay for that if I'm on the other end of it.
Is there anybody that you slept on that you feel better about today before we get into Calvin Ridley? Is there anybody that after the first day, you know, you were really bullish on, or vice versa, you were bearish, you weren't really feeling it, but you've slept on it, you thought about it, you talked about it, you listened to some other people, and you've kind of done, I don't want to say a 180, but you're a little more open-minded to a player in a new situation?
Yeah, a couple of them. I'll give 2 names. The first one's Antonio Gibson. I was in on Gibson just wanting to see where he signed. And then, of course, when he signs with the Patriots, everybody, man, I don't like the Patriots. And I think a lot of that is just the stink of the Patriots, right? You know, it's the stink of the Patriots. That's not a great landing spot. It's not a great offense. But I look at Gibson. I mean, you look at him last year. If you take away touchdowns and if you just look at his fantasy efficiency, he was a top 5 running back. Now, the issue is he didn't put up the points because he's only getting 8 to 9 opportunities a game in his role last year. However, does that mean he's just going to get 8 to 9 opportunities a game in New England? Maybe, maybe not. But I think he's an extremely good bet if you're willing to bet that maybe he gets 12 opportunities a game, 13. You know, you're not going to survive with 8. But if we can get 12, if we can get 13, he is a good player. His career target rate is over 35%. He's there for one reason. He's going to be a guy that if he can get the snaps, he's going to get receptions. And I don't know, how many catches do you think Antonio Gibson had last year? And he had less than 110 touches. But how many of those were catches?
42.
Close. 48 catches. The dude only had 109 opportunities, but he had 48 catches. You're like, damn, that's... So he is what he is, right? But if he can be on the field a little bit more, earn the trust of the coaching staff, I don't think that's a guy that is nuked if they draft a running back, but that's one where I would prefer them to stay away from the Marshawn Lloyd. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather them not go there, but if they don't, I feel real good about Gibson because you look at Ramondre, and Ramondre's good, but Ramondre's not the pillar of health. He's going into a contract year. He's a guy that said he didn't want to take every touch. And if you look at the passing stuff, he's even better than Ramondre. And the last thing I'll say about Gibson is, we assume the Patriots are going to suck. What if they don't? What if they at least have a competent offense that can produce for fantasy? Maybe they're not winning 10 games. But we have this vision in our head of the 2023, 2022 Patriots, and you're like, dude, that was so bad. I didn't want any of the players. And I think it causes his price to go down. So him, and then the other one I'll mention real quick is Justice Hill. Justice Hill is probably a guy that...
Talk about it.
I think he goes into the year. Now, it's the Ravens. They've had a history of literally just bringing in player after player after player. I mean, remember, they're bringing in Kenyon Drake, and they're bringing in Melvin. They're always searching for other guys, right? But I think Justice Hill enters the season with a role, the complementary role to Henry, and everyone's drafting Keaton Mitchell in like round 11, round 12. And that's a 190-pound running back coming off a shredded knee. I mean, Justice Hill's been there. They keep bringing him back. I like Justice Hill. Best ball, dart. I think he's got a role, and nobody's drafting him like that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're out there drafting damn Keaton Mitchell in the 10th or 11th round, you already know what I'm about to sell you. Y'all know. I got a bunch of bags on the way for the draft stream. The magic beans. Here we go. The magic beans. You're just praying to God that he's available at some point. His knee is destroyed. Like, relax. Stop. We wish Keaton Mitchell very well. Speedy recovery. I would not be drafting him in the 10th, 11th round. I would not be doing that. I think that's a little too aggressive for the type of injury that he had. That's the better way to say that. All right. Let's talk about Ridley, man. Let's talk about Ridley because this has been a wild ride. New England was all in. He was waiting till 4 today because he was definitely going back to Jacksonville, but he really didn't want to go to New England. What do you think about Ridley in this landing spot in Tennessee? Let's just talk about Ridley first. Don't talk about Hopkins. Don't talk about Levis. Just Calvin Ridley, $50 million guaranteed. It's crazy for as old as he is or as veteran as he is in the NFL, he was still playing on his damn rookie contract. So good for Ridley to get $50 million guaranteed. What do you think this deal signifies? If I just told you going into free agency that Ridley was about to get 50 M's guaranteed, I think it's, what is it, annual value is, what is it getting, like 25 a year, 23 a year, something like that? What would your initial reaction be? This is an alpha target earner. He's going to get the ball 140 times, 150 opportunities. Like I just told you, he's getting 50 million guaranteed, 23, whatever it is per year. What do you think? And he's going to be on Tennessee.
Well, I think the Tennessee thing is just something that sours people because, again, what we thought of Tennessee is not going to be Tennessee going forward. It's probably going to be the opposite. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I think what it signifies, Ray, is this is what happens when a receiver can get to the market with numerous teams going after him. This is why they don't like the franchise tag. Because it's interesting. I'll just bring this up because David Mulugeta, the agent for Michael Pittman, Calvin Ridley, and Tee Higgins, same agent for all three. And, Pittman's deal, you saw his deal on Monday morning, right? That was one of the first things we got. I think it was 3 years, 72, and it was like 46 guaranteed.
46 guaranteed.
That's 2 franchise tags. That's exactly the money he would get on 2 tags. So for me, that's the Colts going, all right, we're going to tag you twice if you don't agree to this deal. We'll give you a 3rd year. Like, we'll throw you a little bone, but essentially this is your value for the next 2 years. We're already going to have to guarantee that money if we tag you. We're going to give you the $46 million right now. And I said at the time, I think Ridley gets more than Pittman. And people called me crazy.
You did.
And he got more than Pittman. Now, AAV got less than Pittman. But are we really betting on Calvin Ridley being what he is in year 4 of that deal?
No.
Or he cared about that $50 million guaranteed, and if he can survive the year 4, then good for him. But he got more guaranteed money. And a lot of times what happens with these guys is if they get cut early, they end up going somewhere else anyway. So he got more guaranteed money than Pittman. And it probably boxed in somebody like Tee Higgins too. Like he's like, man, I can get Calvin's money, but I'm 4 years younger if I can just get to the market. And his team is going, the Pittman deal is probably what you're worth. So I just think that's interesting. And this just shows the power when a guy like 29-year-old Ridley hits free agency and what you can get. I mean, can you imagine name a top 20 receiver that hit the market, right? What would they get?
Yeah.
Like it pretty crazy if an actual elite like Devontae Smith hits the market. You know what I mean? Like a guy like that hits the market, we just don't know where it would go. So I think those dynamics are cool. And Ridley was pretty good. He was actually better than his fantasy numbers. So I think it's wheels up for Tennessee and what they're trying to do. You said it the other night, man. Surround your quarterback you're taking a shot on with enough weapons to go sink or swim, kid.
You got to, man. Like it's
100%.
The more I'm telling you, man, I've really just been consuming a lot of just former athlete content. I'm just fascinated with how we view the game versus how they talk about the game. And everything that they've been talking about lately, Scott, is how important situation is for these young players, how important coaches are, how important the environment is, like all of that stuff. I just keep hearing that. And you just think about some of these teams, some of these players, some of these situations to where if they were in new locations earlier in their career, how much better things would have gone, or vice versa. If Jamar didn't land in what if the Falcons took Chase at 4 instead of Kyle Pitts? You know what I mean? And he had to suffer through Arthur Smith and not having a quarterback for 2 years of his career. It's just I know that the coaches can't go on the field and run the routes and catch the ball and make the tackles, but it ain't no different than your day-to-day, man. If from the top down it's an organizational mess, your boss doesn't know what the hell he or she is doing, your supervisor doesn't have a plan, like normally things aren't successful in that company. Things aren't successful and changes have to be made. So football is no different. It is no different. There are people who come in that probably have no business being hired or put in those positions to be leaders of men, and it shows. So it's just it's a shining example that every year, you're going to see some of these players hit new teams, and you're not really thinking about those teams right now. And a year from now, you're like, damn, I kind of wanted some pieces of the Titans. Think about the Texans last year. Didn't nobody want a Houston Texan? Everybody said they were incompetent. They didn't know what they were doing. C.J. Stroud was doomed. Nobody's good there. By the end of the season, man, people were able to get thirds for Noah Brown. You just wanted any part of the damn Texans you can get. So when you're looking at Tennessee now, you've got 2 competent running backs in Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. I ain't here to argue about which one is the 1 or the 2. You got 2 good running backs. I know the offensive line is still bad, but they still have their capital. You've got DeAndre Hopkins. You just added Calvin Ridley. Treylon Burks is there. You got Chigo Okonkwo as well at tight end. Again, when we're looking at what they have this year opposed to what they had last year, what New England could have potentially had this year opposed to what they had last year, this is a much better situation and environment, at least on paper, for second-year quarterback Will Levis. So let's talk about some of the ancillary pieces, Scott. Will Levis, where's his value at today? Because it's still, I haven't seen a lot of people say good things about Will Levis. It's kind of like, I don't know about this situation. We'll see. But where are you at with Will in this situation?
Well, you always talk about watch what the NFL team is doing, right? And the Titans, looking where they pick, they're probably in a spot where they could go multiple ways, right? I mean, they could go quarterback if they really wanted. They could go quarterback. They could have gone receiver. A lot of mocks had them potentially taking a receiver. But this is a good tackle draft. And all we've heard is there's 3 or 4 teams, Minnesota, Denver, Las Vegas, all those teams, like how are they going to move up and get a QB? Atlanta, before Kirk Cousins, like all these teams behind them that you're thinking could move up and get a QB. So what this Ridley signing does is it doesn't show that they would be interested in a receiver probably.
Right.
They could, but, it's probably less likely at this point. It probably also signals that, we could take a quarterback, but what we'd probably rather do is trade back with someone that needs a quarterback, still get a tackle, give Levis everything he has to play with next year, pick up some extra capital, and see what he's made of. And I think that's how I would look at it if I'm looking at it from the outside. That did they sell their soul a little bit on this Ridley deal? Sure. But wouldn't it be better to pay a little bit overpay Calvin Ridley to figure out 100% what you have in Will Levis? Even if in 2 years you're going, man, I really wish we didn't have that Ridley cap hit anymore. But I'll tell you what, if you have Will Levis, you're going to go, we'll figure out what to do with that extra $12 million or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
I think we don't look at that. We go, man, these teams not ready to surround this quarterback with weapons. They overpaid. You know what I mean? And it's it's probably the opposite. The value you get back is huge if it works.
If anything, if I'm coaching Tennessee, I'm letting Levis air it out. I got you all these damn weapons. I want to see. I want to see if we can build around you or if we need to look in the 2025 class for our quarterback of the future. And no, we're not about to baby this thing. The expectation level for that team probably right now anyway is already low. I don't believe they can realistically look at that situation with the first year head coach and be like, we're winning the damn AFC South or we're competing for a Super Bowl. I'm letting Levis air that bitch out. I need to know if he can support multiple receivers. What can he do? You give him DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley. And I know people are out on Burks, but I think in the slot he'll be fine for what they'll ask him to do. We'll see how that plays out. When he's on the field and playing, he's been good. He just is never on the field. And then you got Chigo Okonkwo. You got two solid running backs. I get the O-line is a problem, but they probably can address that in the draft. I think this is sort of where Justin Fields to a degree was when they drafted the tackle out of Tennessee in the first round. They brought in DJ Moore. They extended Cole Kmet. They drafted Roschon Johnson, tried to put pieces around him so they could see if he could be the guy of the future. I mean, I think we'll know by midway to the season whether Will Levis is the guy or not. I don't think it'll take very long to kind of figure that out. I think we'll know early, but I like what they're putting around him. So Calvin Ridley versus DeAndre Hopkins. That's what people really want to know. How are you treating these two? Are you full fade both receivers? Are you more in on one than the other? Where are you at with this? Because it did seem like Levis to Hopkins had some sort of chemistry at the end of the year, but that also could have been the simple fact that he'd had nobody else to throw the ball to. But now that Ridley is there and you do have DeAndre Hopkins, how are you treating these two wide receivers in this situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to give a shout out real quick to Nate Sturm in the chat. He said they got Bill Callahan, best offensive line coach in the league. I mean, that's probably a sleeper thing that we don't talk about for fantasy. But you take a team that was awful on the line and bring in the guy that basically built the Browns line from scratch. That could be a big deal too. We may look up and go, wow, they actually have a competent line. And all it took is a couple more guys and a coach. But I don't know, man. I think that with Hopkins, listen, if you have the Trinity tool,
they signed a center. Just letting you know, they signed Lloyd Cushenberry, 4-year, $50 million deal. They gave him $26 million guaranteed. So that there's a plus. There's a start, right? They got this guy in here.
Yep. If you have the Trinity tool, you already know how much we like Hopkins. I don't think that Ridley impacts Hopkins much. If we're going to run the offense that we think they're going to run, and let's slow down a little bit. This is not going to be the 2021 Joe Burrow offense, right? That's what people, they're getting Joe Burrow's OC. They're just going to air it. They're going to pass it 70% of the time. The NFL team also spoke with signing Tony Pollard, right, Ray? Yes. They're not going to run. They're not going to throw it 70% of the time.
Right.
But what you're probably hoping for is an increase in pass volume, middle of the pack, 30 attempts a game, 32 attempts a game, maybe a little bit more. But that the two running backs, the offensive line, the numerous weapons make it so that Levis can be moderately efficient, not like he was last year. And we'll see. But I'm in on Hopkins. I mean, his profile remains the same regardless of whether Ridley's there or not. It probably squeezes out guys like Burks a little bit, like Chiga Okonkwo a little bit. but I'm not betting against DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, look at that top 8 Trinity score.
Yep.
And I bet you if you run, is that with KTC?
Nah, this is just
KTC?
this is just against points per game. So just literally, it's just showing you Hopkins was fantastic and below the regression line. Like there's so much room for him to move up with more competency around him at quarterback situation, all of that stuff. So this is just true. Against KTC, he's down here. His KTC value is like 2,200. He's like way down there versus the other guys. But this is just strictly what they scored per game this year, and you see how high up DeAndre Hopkins is compared to Calvin Ridley on the tool.
And I think this will cause people to kind of be a little less apt to want to buy in on Hopkins. But I'll get more Hopkins because of this. Not that I don't want Ridley, but I think the narrative about, they're going to cut Hopkins or, he's going to be significantly impacted. Hopkins was not done last year. He is what he is, but he didn't show any signs of declining. So, I mean, I'm willing to buy back in on – could they support two top 24 receivers, you think, right? If the concentration's good enough?
I mean, if you got 2 receivers doing as much wide receiver shit as these two, then the answer is yes. And you ask Trinity versus KTC, so let's pull it up right there. You can see there's Ridley.
Laughable.
He's valued, this is what he gave you. He's valued 34.86. DeAndre Hopkins, 8.78, 25.65. Valued much less, but yet did much more. Target share, yard per route run, target per route run. He did more within that offense than Calvin Ridley did. So it's going to be interesting to watch those two sort of go at it. But can it? I'm just going to say this. Last year, nobody thought, I continue to harp on this, man. Nobody thought Houston was going to be worth anything. Anything. Completely discounted Houston. Instead, you guys were listening to some loudmouth dude named Ray tell you to buy all those giants, Daniel Jones and Isaiah Hodgins and all those dudes, yet no one gave Houston any shred of credibility. Rookie quarterback, they've been historically bad. You're buying, and then look at how that played out. So I think something that I don't want to do this year is just discount these type of situations where when you've got wholesale changes, just like Houston did, wholesale changes, Tennessee, same thing. Like you might get, I'm not saying that you're getting a Houston Texans who goes to a deep playoff run, but to expect them to maybe be a little bit better than they were last year, I don't think that's going out on a limb to say this. You just said it, this New England team, the one thing I can guarantee you is it's not going to look like Bill Belichick because it's different. It's different people there, different regime there, different players there. This Tennessee team is probably going to look a hell of a lot different than it has under Mike Vrabel. So I'm more open-minded to both sides of the range of outcome coin playing out. And I think that's a lost art in Dynasty, man. People are so dogmatic, know-it-all, that they can't even see the other side of the outcome taking place, right? They know unequivocally that this is the outcome. Whereas I think we try to do a very good job if it could be this, but if it's not. And that's one thing I am very proud of is that we do talk through a little bit of everything. Well, what if things don't get better? What if Fields doesn't have a job? And it's not even to harp on that, but we talked about that. What if he doesn't? How do you play that? What if the market isn't robust? So can they support 2 top 24 receivers? Maybe, but if that were to be the case, what I would also layer on top of that is probably neither of them are top 12. Neither, you don't have top 12 guys. You probably don't have a top 15 guy. They're probably wide receiver 18, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 19, wide receiver 25. Like, I think if that were to be the case, they're probably in that back end wide receiver 2 range.
Yeah, and I think it's also some humility for all of us because most people last year didn't necessarily love the Will Levis landing spot. Yes, there was some opportunity because of who they had as the starter. But I don't think, even though the team didn't project to be very good, I don't think people projected, man, Mike Vrabel is just going to get canned and they're going to overhaul the entire thing in less than a year. So I think a lot of people actually hated on the Levis landing spot a little bit too because of this fallacy that they weren't going to be good, but they didn't use enough of capital on him to say he's for sure going to be the starter. So basically, they're just going to replace him next year, but they're not going to overhaul the coaching staff and bring in somebody new. And how wrong were we there, where now it appears they've gone a 180 and they're looking to build through offensive line, passing game, like do what everybody else is doing, which was the opposite of where they were. And a year ago, I would have been laughed at if I would have said, man, Titans are going to be one of the most pass-heavy offenses here in the next 2 years, and Will Levis is going to lead the way. People would have gone, there's no way that's going to happen. Vrabel's too good of a coach. They'll never fire him. They'll never get anybody better. He's stuck. And here we are. A year later, less than a damn year later.
Yeah.
And we're looking at a brand new situation. So just remember that when you see where a quarterback lands this year. A quarterback lands in Denver. And you're like, you know what? He's there with Sean Payton his whole career. Whether you think that's positive or negative. But what if next year there's no more Sean Payton? You know what I mean? Like, any situation can change. At least most of them. You can't just say, oh, that's going to be the same for year after year after year. So just remember that.
Scott, one more player I want to ask you about. Let's put the Hopium hat on. I'm going to get a hat. Hopium hat. Hollywood Brown, still unsigned. Where do we want him to land? If it's Kansas City, that's cool, but tell me why and what you think that range of outcome would be. So where do you want Hollywood Brown to land? I haven't seen anything. I just did a little quick Twitter scan or X scan, and oh yeah, Hollywood Brown and Mike Williams, both free agents. Are you willing to take the bet on either of those two players now before they hit a landing spot?
Yeah, I think Hollywood for sure, just because if he's linked to the Chiefs, there's just a ton of hopium that'll be in there if he ends up going there. I feel better about Hollywood Brown because I do think he's just a better receiver than Mike Williams is. Like, his historic numbers are better than Mike Williams. But I can sell both of them if they go to Kansas City. That's going to be the one people chase. So I'm waiting for them to get one of the two. I don't know which. I would hope it's Hollywood because I have more Hollywood. I think there's more excitement around a guy like him. He basically becomes what Diontae was earlier. We talked about, man, you've kind of gotten a lifeline if Hollywood Brown goes to Kansas City. Because then you have to assess the situation. Because there's still a chance, right? They draft Hollywood Brown, but then they also bring in a receiver that you like. Now you're going, all right, Kelsey, Hollywood, Rice, the rookie. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as clear cut as like they sign a receiver they're not going to draft.
I think they'll still draft one. It may not be at 32, but they're still going to take a receiver or two in this class.
One that somebody likes. And that's the key here is there's a chance they draft a receiver. Maybe it's in round 2 or even round 3. But if people like them, what's that going to mean? They're going to like Hollywood a little less.
Javon Baker.
You know what I mean?
Javon Baker goes there, you know?
We can throw out 20 names, and you're like, okay, I like that guy. Andy's on the Chiefs. Man, I don't know about that Hollywood. So you start talking themselves out of Hollywood Brown when they do that. So I hope he goes to KC. But the challenge is then, all right, you have the honeypot landing spot. You have a guy that used to be valued as a top 24 dynasty receiver. The two have just come together. You got to make the decision, just like Diontae. This is probably your last lifetime to move them. So don't go, I kept Hollywood. He got injured again, Ray. He didn't help me. You'll never have a lifeline again. So just acknowledge that and don't tell me in 3 years, oh, man, what a bust he was. Ever since his 3rd year in Baltimore, he never did anything. Yeah, but you know what? You had this window where someone sent you that 25 first in your inbox, and you squinted and looked at that Chiefs helmet and went, nah, man, I can't do it. But then call him a bust 2 years later when you didn't take that deal. So just be prepared for that conversation if he goes to KC.
So once this is over, there's literally nothing else going on between now and the draft. It's pro days, and it's funny now. It's just funny, the differences in reaction now. I saw Spencer Rattler at his pro day. He makes a standard pass in shorts, and it's, oh my God, this is the sleeper of 20. I hope we're past that. I hope we are past shorts and pro day throws against air. That is about 2 years too far gone. Like, we don't do that anymore. But what's your advice?
He didn't miss a throw, I heard.
He didn't miss. No
Perfect.
passes hit the ground. None of them hit the ground. Just flawless. Best passing performance I've ever seen at a South Carolina Pro Day. I hope we're not consuming that as actionable, yet we're still doing it. But what advice do you have for dynasty managers right now, where there's not a lot going on? It's just a lot of pro day stuff. It's mock draft after mock draft. It's speculation season. Probably not a ton of trades. So, those rookie draft picks are like money burner holes in people's pockets. So what is your sort of advice? What to do now where things are about to kind of slow down after these free agents kind of wrap up? Like, what's your advice for people to do right now in their leagues?
Well, I would say you got to go back to your leagues, refresh your browser because a lot has changed over the last 3 or 4 days, and then go right back to it. Start looking at your roster construction, looking at maybe some bets that have better odds now than they did before, and some players where you were like, all right, I was betting on this guy to land somewhere in free agency, but man, those 7 A.J. Dillon shares, I'm not really feeling so good about him now. He's not in a spot where he's got a guaranteed role. And I'm not even sure what to do with a guy like that. He's a running back on a 53-man roster probably, but he didn't get a spot like a Gibson or, you know what I mean? Zach Moss. Like, you were hoping for that, and it may not happen. So I think you just have to go back, hit refresh. The activity in your league should pick up after this week because there's only like 5 weeks until the draft, 6 weeks till the draft. So the activity should pick up. But I think it's just going back and trying to spot the plus EV bets. Diontae's not a plus EV bet now. You want to buy him, you're buying at probably the highest sticker cost it's going to take. So maybe instead of doing that, you go, okay, who's the next Diontae? What's a bet that's being undervalued here that I'm willing? Because you mentioned it. You nailed it. The next big event is the draft. You have to go and examine, okay, does the consensus think X is going to happen in the draft? Maybe I can find an edge by going against that. I don't think that's going to happen in the draft. And I mean, you can formulate a million bets that you want to make. I don't think the Broncos trade up for a QB. All right, maybe they roll into the year with Ryan Tannehill and Jarrett Stidham. One of them's going to play. Nah, I couldn't tell you what that's going to look like. But that's the kind of bet that if you made that bet right now, you could look up and to start the season, you have a starter and you paid peanuts. You're wrong, you're nuked. But those are the kind of bets I want to make now. What you don't want to do is wait for them to make that move.
If you're wrong, you didn't lose anything because what did one of those guys cost you? Like literally, it's the plus EV bet. Literally.
Correct. Yeah, and when I mean nuked, meaning like the bet you made is lost. But to Ray's point, you're not risking a ton. Like you're risking 10-1 return if you're right. And what did you lose if you're wrong? But that's the kind of thing what you don't want to do is go, you know what, I'm going to wait. I'm scared Denver's going to bring in a quarterback in the draft. And then, I mean, I already saw it. Someone I saw paid a $208 for Gardner Minshew today. Now, it's a fair price if he's going to start. But, man, like, wouldn't you have felt better if you would have got some Minshews for free after the season ended versus pay? The 208 is the, oh, man, I know what's going to happen. So I just don't want to pay those odds when the odds were 3 times as good a week ago. That's all. Think about it that way when you're trying to figure out what trades to send and what trades to accept.
All right, Scott, we got one super chat we got to hit, and then we'll get out of here for the evening. This is from Sean. Tear down or best team name tear down for what? Or 40-yard DoorDash. I kind of like 40-yard DoorDash. In a 1 QB best ball start 10, do you trade Saquon Barkley, Mike Evans 25 first for Jacobs and Tyreek contending? 1 QB
you know what?
best ball.
I'm going to defer to you here because I would have been like all in because it's a 1 QB and he's a contender. I mean, what the hell is the 109 next year?
Yeah, I don't really care about that.
But in a best ball, Ray, would you rather take that first, stick with the side you have, and try to go get another starter and take the 3 pieces in best ball? That's more of a best ball thing. What would you do here?
That's what if you're already pot committed to moving the 25 first, I'm not in favor because here's the thing that I know. You might not be able to get a wide receiver the caliber of Tyreek Hill for that single first, but you probably can get a damn good one. If you're already cool with moving at 25 first, that's your own. You're a contending team. You're betting against where your first is going to be. You're saying, shit, this is going to be the 110. I don't even care about that. It's 2025. I'm fine with I'd actually, and we talked about this last night, I would prefer Saquon over Josh Jacobs. That's just me. I'd prefer that situation over Josh Jacobs in Green Bay, but you can call those guys a wash. And then, yeah, I would rather have Tyreek Hill over Mike Evans in a vacuum, but it's best ball. So if I can move that 25 first and get a guy that has a chance to crack your lineup every single week and provide you some spike weeks, I'd see what I can do with that 25 first before I'd make that deal personally.
I mean, how about you insert the names Calvin Ridley or Diontae Johnson? Would you take Diontae or Calvin plus Evans over Tyreek in a best ball? Would you rather have the two?
Yes. I want two shots. You got to crack the lineup, baby. I want multiple darts.
There's an idea. Those two. That'd be the one you know what? I'll send that 110 for Calvin Ridley or Diontae. Like that's kind of like the perfect price point to pay. You don't feel awful if you did it, but if it works.
Oh, D-Bro.
Give me
D-Bro said he moved Brissett for some late seconds today in Superflex. Scott said robbery. I agree. I mean, Scott.
Listen, if you can get seconds for the career backup QBs that have a job for the next six weeks, and he got a decent deal, but right, he didn't get the Minshew deal. He got a 1-year backup.
I'm just gonna say this, man. They signed him and they brought back Nathan Rourke. They got Bailey Zappi there. I'm not sold that they take a quarterback at 3. I know they need one, but just me personally, I'm not sold that they take. I think my personal opinion, man. I think everybody in the draft and every analyst, except for a few, believe that Caleb Williams, that is the quarterback prospect. There isn't Caleb and all these other guys in the same tier as him. It's Caleb Williams is the prize. And if you can't get Caleb, I understand drafting because you need the quarterback, but if they're not that game franchise changer for you and you believe Marv is and he's BPA, I know everyone's saying get a quarterback. I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not all the way convinced that they take a QB at 3. I'm just not. And as aggressively as they were pursuing Calvin Ridley, and apparently the offer was right there, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Are you making that bet with your second rounder right now, though? On Jacoby?
No.
Okay.
I'm not that confident, but it's starting to. I'm just throwing that out there, Scott. I'm throwing that out there.
I mean, you are a very influential voice, and if you just listen to that last 2 minutes, there's probably people in this audience sitting here going, "Wait, man, Ray just sold me on those Brissett shares. Let me go send my seconds." So you're not saying send a second, but you're also saying you wouldn't hate getting some Brissetts a little bit cheaper, right? If someone's just convinced they're going Jaden Daniels or Drake May. Okay.
I'm not paying no second. But if I'm working out a bigger deal and I can just get him thrown in, and here's the beauty of a deal like that, you'll know April 25th or 20, whenever the night of the draft, whether you need to keep him or cut him, or what you have. You'll know very early before the season with plenty of time to make a move. But we appreciate y'all being here for another episode of Destination Chill. Make sure y'all are tapped in every Sunday, every Wednesday. Scott and I are going live for about an hour to have conversations with y'all about stuff that's happening in the league. Make sure you check out everything that Scott's doing here on Destination Devy podcast feed, here on the YouTube channel, as well as Trades in 5. We got a lot of dope collaborative things that we have coming, especially for the draft. Y'all aren't going to want to miss that. Check out all of our content on destinationdevy.com. And if you just want to engage with Scott and I more than what you currently are, go to the Discord, go to the Patreon, patreon.com/allgas. Jump in the cord, go to destinationdevy.com, get access to the Trinity tool. I'm just telling y'all, it's the best tool for wide receiver opportunity, utilization, recognition in the fantasy game. And I stamp that. It is amazing, especially when you're knowing what you're doing on there and looking around. We just appreciate the love, the thumbs up button, like the content. Scott, appreciate you, my brother. It's been a long week. I know it's been a grind. Let's recharge them batteries and let's bring that gas